We are counting down to the official signing day for 2012 for college football, and what better way to break down the Michigan Wolverines, a premier program that's back on track, and after a big BCS bowl berth this past 2011 college football season. I'm Dan Harrelson alongside Nick Taylor, and let's break down the 2012 recruiting for the Wolverines with Sam Webb. He's with Go Blue Wolverine and does some work with Scout. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Pretty well. Let's talk about Brady Hoke with the second recruiting class. Where does he stand right now?
Well, it's Brady's first full recruiting class at Michigan. He obviously picked it up toward the end last year because he was brought on in January, so was charged with closing out a recruiting class that was mostly done. But people around here knew what they were getting in Brady Hoke as a recruiter. He was an outstanding recruiter when he was with Michigan as an assistant from the mid '90s on through the early 2000s. He was involved in recruiting Tom Brady here, but he also went and got big-time guys like Justin Fergus, who was the number one running back recruit in the country out of California. When he was an assistant here, he went and got Leon Hall, who was the top defensive back target out of San Diego. When Brady was here, he went and got Larry Stevens, who was the top defensive end linebacker recruit out of Washington. So Brady had a reputation as an outstanding recruiter here as an assistant. And it was natural that he was going to be able to really come here and recruit as a head coach. He's really hands-on in that regard, really great at forging relationships. One of the best things he did was surround himself with a staff of good recruiters led by Greg Madison, who, again, a guy who was a former Michigan assistant and an outstanding recruiter when he was here before he left to go to Notre Dame as the defensive coordinator and then later to Florida as the defensive coordinator before heading on to the Baltimore Ravens. And the thing that Greg Madison has is an outstanding ability to connect with kids. And then when you can connect with kids and then tell those same kids, hey, I coach Ray Lewis, I coach Ed Reed, I coach Haloti Ngata. Those are major selling points when you're sitting in the living rooms of some of the top recruits in the country. And I think that was largely responsible for Michigan's ability to go in and really land an outstanding group of defensive linemen in this class. They have definitely benefited, though, from the turnover at Ohio State. Michigan generally is able to go in Ohio and pluck some pretty good guys like Desmond Howard and Charles Woodson over the years. But, Ohio State is always going to get the majority of the top guys in Ohio. That's not necessarily the case this year. I think they recruited Ohio State to a draw in the state of Ohio this year. That's the exception to the rule. That's not generally going to be the case. I think you're going to see Michigan just kind of hold their own, get a few top guys, and Ohio State go back and get in the majority of the guys. But this was a year where Michigan really took advantage of A, the turnover in Ohio, and B, the outstanding recruiters that they have on staff here.
Well, let's talk about Brady Hoke and Urban Meyer for a moment as it relates to recruiting. Brady obviously did a great job this year with the Michigan team, but he did have a lot of players, left over obviously from the previous staff, and it was built around a different offensive philosophy, if you will. How does the recruiting relate, do you think, moving forward, particularly against Urban Meyer, who is another spread guy, similar to Rodriguez in some ways as far as recruiting? How do you think that's going to translate? And we could maybe even throw Notre Dame into this discussion with Brian Kelly looking like he's on the verge of building something at Notre Dame.
That's a great question. I think that the intersection of recruits is not quite as pronounced as, say, if Ohio State was still under Jim Tressel. They probably butt heads a lot more. But as it stands, I think, even when Rich Rodriguez was here, he'd say, hey, just because we're a spread team doesn't mean we don't want big, talented guys. I think you'll see spread teams maybe recruit dual threat quarterbacks a little bit more. Maybe they won't butt heads over guys like that. The spread teams recruit slot guys a little bit more. But I think you'll still, they're still going to recruit a lot of the same offensive linemen. Michigan has a big 6'6", 270-pound tight end in their class. Urban Meyer tried to take him away from Michigan when he got on staff. So, I think you're still going to see them start to talk about that, but the major issue that he had was he just wasn't received very well in the state of Michigan, in the Midwest in particular. I don't think it was for lack of trying. I think Rich didn't, I think the PR didn't really go too well for him, and he didn't get off on the right foot. And when you get off on the wrong foot with some high school coaches, that the bad opinions tend to spread like a rash, and that kind of was the case for Rich. It's different with Brady. Brady had a reputation already when he set foot back in Michigan. People in the state know him, and he's from Ohio. Brady was born and raised in Ohio. The high school coaches there think of him very, very fondly. And while Urban Meyer certainly will, I think, has hit the ground running as a recruiter in Ohio, I just don't expect Michigan to get shut out of Ohio like they did for the most part. I mean, Rich Rodriguez, his first year on staff, he did get the number one recruit in Ohio that first year. But after that, he was shut out. But it wasn't, it's not like it was a new phenomenon, if you will, for Michigan. And at that point, the struggle in Ohio, the last few years before Rich Rodriguez got here, Michigan wasn't having very much success in Ohio. As a matter of fact, one year, Jim Tressel had completely shut Michigan out of getting any guys in Ohio, and that was before Rich Rodriguez even got on staff there. So it was a little bit of an issue already. It became more of an issue the second and third year of Rich Rodriguez's tenure, but I think it will not be an issue at all with Brady Hoco and staff. Like I said, received very well, and then Greg Madison, who we talked about in the first question, has an outstanding reputation in Ohio. Also, he went in Ohio this past year and just ran roughshod through the state, taking a number of the top players and getting them linked up to Michigan.
Well, Sam, you mentioned the top recruit Rich Rod was able to pull in. He probably should have had Terrell Pryor, and Terrell Pryor almost went to Michigan before he went to Ohio State, because he said that I think Pryor wanted to play basketball as well, but that never panned out. Looking back at the whole Ohio State Jim Tressel situation with Pryor and all the other guys, do you think he may have been paid to go to Ohio State? Because I mean, he was.
Well, I tend not to deal in conjecture. I don't know if there were any extra things going on with Terrell Pryor in Ohio State. I do know that Jim Tressel had established a relationship with one of the guys that was really helping Pryor go through his recruiting process. Now, if there are any extracurriculars involved in that recruiting, only they know. There's nothing that's been proven in the NCAA, so I tend to deal with the things that we know. What we know is that once he got there was some impropriety, and Ohio State is paying the price, at least in part, for that. I think in retrospect, Terrell Pryor probably would have been best served to be in the spread. I think his skill set would have been better utilized. But each guy has to make the decision that's best for him. But if you look at the situation, Rich Rodriguez, if he steps into the Michigan job with Terrell Pryor his first year, and assuming for the sake of argument that there are no illegal things going on in Terrell Pryor's case, boy, how things might look different, because Rich Rodriguez inherited a defense that was very experienced. They didn't perform like that, and I think that was his biggest failing as a coach. He saw progress on the offensive side of the football. The defense just failed miserably and got worse every year, and that was, I think, Rich's biggest problem. But if he steps into that job with Terrell Pryor first year, who knows how it would have worked out. You look at Urban Meyer, he steps in there with Braxton Miller. And it's a much different scenario than Rich Rodriguez stepping into a system where you're trying to change it to a spread with guys like Steve Street and a walk-on quarterback like Nick Sheridan. I think Urban Meyer will have a much better go of it when it comes to transitioning into a spread offense at Ohio State this year with a quarterback that is tailor-made to play that kind of offense. I think Ohio State's going to be a real team to be reckoned with, even in Urban Meyer's first year.
Well, I was just wondering, for people that haven't followed Michigan recruiting closely, the fans of the website in general, how many commitments did you guys maybe pick up as a result of finally beating Ohio State? I mean, was that game? I know it's a rival game, but how big was that game in terms of recruiting? Because I mean, let's face it, that game is the game that got you guys
Michigan had, I'm trying to think, have they picked up a single commitment since that? They picked up a couple of commitments since that game. One was a receiver from Ohio, and one was a receiver from Missouri. But Michigan had 22 commitments already prior to the Ohio State game, and they had already had their Ohio guys already firmly committed. They aren't even these last few guys they're kind of looking at. Our guys, they're recruiting a guy from Washington, big offensive lineman from Washington. They're in the running for a big offensive lineman, two big offensive linemen, one from Illinois and one from Colorado. And then there is a tight end. There's one tight end from Ohio, but he's not even considering Ohio State. So there's, I think it'll maybe reap dividends, bigger dividends going forward when it comes to recruiting in the state of Ohio. This was more about Michigan riding the ship. That had been a rivalry that was going the wrong way for quite some time. Michigan hadn't won that game since 2003. So they needed to get a good taste in their mouths again. It was much like when before Jim Tressel became the coach there, when Michigan was 2-10-1 against John Cooper. It was a much different scenario when he was the coach. Jim Tressel turns that thing around. Michigan fans are hoping that this is different with Brady Hoke on staff, but it didn't really play much into recruiting this year. It might play a lot more into it going forward.
I got a quick follow-up to that, Dan. I guess it's just an add-on, if you will, to that question. How big was the Virginia Tech win since it actually was a BCS game? Did you hear of any recruits maybe committing to Michigan after that game?
Well, there hasn't been any recruits committed since that game happened. But anytime you can have your program on national television, nationally televised game in the spotlight, the only game on TV that night, that is a huge, huge selling point. Michigan prides itself on being able to recruit from coast to coast. So you need that kind of visibility, that kind of exposure, and to win the game, I think put the seal on Brady Hoke's. It's like a bow, like a stamp on Brady Hoke's first season as Michigan coach to win 11 games, to win a BCS bowl game. You can walk into the living room of a kid and say Michigan is back. That's the biggest thing that I think they take away from that game. So, it hasn't reaped any dividends yet. Maybe it will in these last few recruits. But certainly you can tell with some of the juniors that we've talked to that that they've offered, they certainly took notice of the fact that Michigan went back into BCS and they won it. So again, I think this first season, what Brady Hoke was able to do this first year, is going to reap more dividends on the recruiting trail going forward. I think if you look at their recruiting class this year, it's more about a new coach bounce. A lot of times when a new coach steps in, there's a lot of buzz and a lot of excitement there to be able to pick up the recruits because of that. I think he has a great, recruiting sort of persona, personality. He really connects with kids. You have that. And then the other thing is that, Ohio State had major issues this year. There was a lot. You had the NCAA investigation. You had the firing of Jim Tressel. You had the coaching search. All those things made it a little bit easier to recruit in the state of Ohio in a year where it was an outstanding year for talent. So Michigan certainly benefited from that.
Well, Sam, thank you for coming on this morning and breaking down the Michigan Wolverines in the 2012 recruiting class.
You did a great job, Sam, and we know it was for the moment. We definitely love to keep in touch with you, and I'm sure Dan can maybe give you the website links and keep in touch.